organization total, of which 152 of those are Quail Forever. 170 field staff out on the ground for the whole organization doing the work. So I think this is important to show you kind of what Quail Forever is a part of. It's a big organization as a whole when you look at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever together. Maybe we can get to the saturation that Iowa has one day of pheasant chapters. There's a chapter in every single county. 2 of those are yellow because they're Quail Forever, but we're working that way. We're not quite there yet here in Tennessee. But our model, if you don't know already, is pretty simple. Chapters raise money and they keep it. 100% of the funds raised for Quail Forever and Pheasants Forever chapter stays right there. The decision on where to spend that money stays with the chapters. They send us back the membership dollars, $30 a person, and they send us back if they buy anything from us. Of course, they pay for that, but it's pretty straightforward. We've got a great system in place for letting them keep the IRS happy with their reporting. But we do a lot of stuff: conservation, education, habitat projects, purchasing equipment, land purchases, where we typically turn those over to state or federal agencies. But a whole lot of different and diverse things going on. We just ask that they don't raise the money that they raise. They don't use it to stock birds or do a predator eradication program, just because both of those things aren't effective. If you can say, well, you might get a little bit out of that, but if you stop doing it, you're right back where you started. You improve the habitat and get that right, you're going to have birds. If you get kids interested in the outdoors, you're going to have somebody that's going to be a hunter or an outdoors person, for the rest of their life. So we focus on kids and habitat. We've done a lot. Quail Forever as an organization has done a lot, but if you look at the big numbers, these are the numbers for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever combined. But we are in 2014. I don't have the 15 numbers yet, but 53, which our fiscal year just ended, 2015 ends in June, but 53, almost $54 million organization in 2014 fiscal year. One of the highest ratios, operating cost to money on the ground out there. 9.1% operating cost is all we're using at the main office there to run on, and the rest of it goes in the ground. A little bit about habitat, and I did this quite honestly for either an education component to answer some questions that people always have, because I'm a biologist at heart and I can't help but put something in there about quail and quail habitat into a presentation. It's the obligatory habitat slides, I guess, but I say simple, that's with a grain of salt. It's not necessarily simple to do it, but the solution is fairly simple. You put more habitat on the ground, you're going to have more farmland wildlife. You got to do it in the right ways. You got to do quality work, but if you do importance of habitat for birds, if you can't produce them, if you don't have the factory and nesting cover, if you don't have the place for the chicks to rear and get up to an age where they're not as vulnerable, then all the other things are not going to matter. I would actually put these 1, 2, and 10 in order of importance. Winter cover is way down the list, especially in Tennessee. A lot of people think, well, winter cover is where it's at. That's where it all, I see quail there. Well, yeah, it's because you're out there hunting them, and that's where you see them. But it is not the limiting factor. Not the escape cover is not the single limiting factor. Nesting and brood rearing cover is. Here's, I threw this up there on the top, the new slide that I found, and I like it because it kind of shows, people say, well, man, I've heard this once at a trade show, I've heard it a million times. I have not, everything's the same as it was 30 years ago, and I don't have any quail on my farm. Well, what have you been doing it to keep it the same? What have you been doing for 30 years to keep it the same as it was 30 years ago? What do you mean? Well, if you haven't done anything in 30 years, it's way, way different. It's so incremental in the changes, you don't notice it. So, quail, if you can see, quail live here in the annual weeds, perennial grasses, sometimes perennial weeds and grasses and annual weeds. That's where they live. That's where they want. They want a little bit of woody cover, but why are there so many deer and turkey? That's all, I can't help but hear, that's all the agency cares about. Well, it's because a lot of people deer and turkey hunt, for one, but we have deer and turkey habitat in Tennessee. That's what we have. We have mature woods. We have open fields, neither of which are conducive to quail habitat. They live on the edge. They live, in woody and shrubby cover and no introduced grasses. And they and this other one down at the bottom is kind of the same idea, but the successional wheel, quail and pheasants fall right in here. After the guy comes in with the plow, a couple years later is where quail love. And then it starts to grow up. And if you don't repeat the cycle and keep that in that early successional habitat stage, you're not going to have quail. Our biggest challenges, well, we got a lot of them. Exotic introduced grasses, I would say, were number one. If we could do one thing in the state of Tennessee to improve quail numbers, we could kill, however many acres of fescue and orchard grass we could eradicate. Hey, I grew up a farmer, a beef cattle farmer. I understand we got to have it for hay. But if you want to do that, most people want to go plant something. If you just go buy Roundup and kill the fescue and let stuff grow back, you're going to have a better chance. It's too thick, fescue and orchard grass and all those introduced grasses are too thick for quail, especially the chicks. It's not good nesting cover. We don't have small weedy crop fields, whether it be corn or beans or small grains, all kinds of things that used to be out there in small patch sizes. We don't have those really anymore, and that's a product of farming advances, agricultural economics and efficiencies have increased. So we got to get more done with less. Dairy farming is kind of a thing of the past here in Tennessee, not completely, but dairy farming used to produce a lot more small grains, small fields, those fallow fields, heavy or more turnover in the field components, and so we saw more diversity as a result. Herbicide management on crops, sure, it does affect it. Now when you see a corn or bean field, it's corn and beans. There are no beggar's lice in there, or stick tights as we'd call them. There's not a lot of those things that are out there, foxtails and different millets that are out there for food. It's not there anymore. No fallow fields to speak of. This graph, again, I'm not trying to weight you down too much, but the big number here, the graphs, look at the fallow field and the old cornfield. That's where you find birds. You look at a cornfield or an area that's just been burned. Burning is great for quail, but it reduces the diversity that first year for a number of insects that are available. We don't have edge. What we have in Tennessee is this sharp transition. We go from mature woods to crop or fescue or pasture, hayfield. If we have this area that has this gradual slope in it, we have birds typically. Disappearing natural habitats, management of pine stands, especially in areas like the plateau. Now this is not, longleaf pine doesn't pertain to here, but shortleaf could be, we could replace that longleaf with a shortleaf. Open, diverse stands, low basal area where you only have 30, 40, 50 trees per acre, and big round numbers, but what we have looks a lot like this. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen that, and that's through either CRP management or that's through industrial pine plantations. We're growing timber, and I understand that, but we're not necessarily getting a whole lot of wildlife benefit out of those. We would love it if it looked more like this, an open savanna type habitat where you've got grasses. Sunlight getting on the ground lets the grasses come in, and we get more birds. Here's one of the biggest ones. Well, innovations in agriculture. We get bigger machinery. We get 20-row planters. We get 12-row pickers. We got more time to bush hog. We got 15-foot bat wings. So we get bush hog disease. It's rampant. It's everywhere. It's hard to stop because, man, it's fun to mow. But we got bush hog disease. We own it. We want it clean. It's our German ancestry maybe. I don't know what it is. We want it clean and nice. By golly, that man that let it grow up over there, what has he done? He has not done, it looks terrible. We drove by it, but to the wildlife, it looks wonderful. When you go out west hunting, if you do that, where do you go? You go to the lazy farmers. I mean, that's what I always hear. Oh man, you go that guy. He doesn't take care of his place. He's got birds. Duh. I mean, that's not real hard to understand, but we don't seem to kind of flip that switch sometimes. We want it both ways. Wildlife doesn't necessarily like order. So I say all those negative things to say there is hope and there's help. The quail are unbelievably resilient. They respond fast to change. They're prolific breeders. They can have multiple clutches per year. The males can actually brood some of the nests and the young as well. So they respond quickly to change. And if we kill some introduced grasses out and create some bare ground, just let the weeds grow up, you'd be amazed at the response. How do those farm bill biologists fit into all that? Well, they're doing a lot of things, and this is kind of that component of the talk. They do a lot of what I just did. They go out, and the first thing they do is they have to kind of give that habitat and biology lesson and talk about really why is it important? Why is what I have now not good enough? Why do I not have birds? Why do I not have wildlife here? Well, let's do the education component first. Then they talk with them about opportunities that are out there. They offer technical assistance, and I'll go into that a little bit because it's a jungle out there with some of these acronyms. They typically can find people funding guidance, and I would love to say that there's a whole lot of people out there just wanting to do habitat out of the goodness of their heart and because they got enough money to do it, and most of the time they want to do it and they have good intentions, but they also want to know if there's some financial assistance out there, and that's fine. We're glad to help them provide that, and then we can turn around on the back end and help them implement what we've talked to them about. This program started in South Dakota in 2003, so it's about 12 years old. There were 4 people on the ground there. We've got 120 positions now out on the ground, 120,000 projects, almost 3 million acres in 12 years. There are a lot of different funding sources for how they get there, and each state is pretty much different, but typically a lot of the funding is coming either from grants. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has been generous for ours here in the state. State wildlife agencies, USD, NRCS, Forest Service, even some components, BLM out west. There are a lot of things, and then we ask chapters for some support through their cash match. Here's where those people are located throughout the U.S. Here's where ours in Tennessee are located. We have 2 covering 10 counties each, between the rivers, between the Mississippi and the Tennessee River. And then David, so that's the farthest west is Courtney Cox. And then Brittany Vyers is in the next box there. She's out of the field office there in Carroll County. And then David Peters is up on the plateau out of Sparta. He's covering 9 counties up there, primarily focused more on a forestry aspect, shortleaf pine management, reestablishment. But there are plenty of grassland components there too when he has the opportunity, but it's more of a forested community up there on the plateau. So again, they're specialized consultants. They know these conservation programs inside and out. They got a knowledge of all of these programs, and they're knowledgeable about habitat planning. My background is in wildlife, but my job as a representative is to promote the organization, to assist chapters with things that they have going on. These people are doing the on-the-ground work. They're the ones out there getting the acres in the ground. This is one of the things that they deal with every day. The acronym jungle. There is 50 different acronyms in NRCS and even in a little bit with TWRA programs that these people know inside and out. They know what a CP4D is without even thinking. They know a CP42 is a real diverse pollinator habitat mix, and they know what species you need to plant on a wet side or a dry side or an upland, or a hillside, they know all those things. We don't have to get bogged down. Landowners don't have to get bogged down in that. They help at the state level. They help at the county level, where sometimes the district conservationist doesn't know those things and doesn't want to know, but that we have a biologist, and then the state has biologists as well in the regions, as you know, that do those things for them. It makes the effect over time for both our farm bill biologists and the state's wildlife biologists. The effect is that we get a whole lot more habitat out on the ground because we don't have to have all the counties in Tennessee be educated about it. We can have 10 or 12 people in the state that know it well, and they can cover it. Big numbers here. There's just the big round numbers. One slide, the take-home one here, kind of since 2013, in April 2013, these 3 people, and David has just been on in the plateau about a year, but they've done 10 landowner workshops. They've got 657 quality landowner contracts, and that means that they met with a person, they talked about the person, I don't want to say talk them into it, but they worked with them to get them involved in a wildlife beneficial program, or they were already in some program, and then they talked with them about increasing that benefit through management. So that is not just the number of people that they shook hands with and went to church and got to count 15 or whatever. It was real people that got results. That's a great number to me. It's kind of a friends and acquaintances differentiation, if you will. 12,139 acres of wildlife habitat plans were drawn up. That's again, acres written into plans that are wildlife beneficial. 22,000, almost 23,000 acres of certified technical assistance, so that they went out and they spoke with someone again, about management or about renewing their contract or about doing things that I won't say that it wouldn't have happened without them, but it was definitely it happened quicker and and at a higher level of quality for wildlife by them speaking with them. So the overall effect still is a benefit to wildlife by having those acres in there. It has been wildly successful. We are very happy with it. The NIFWIF report is right there. If you want to wade through it, you can. It's not terrible. It's not, but it's. I wouldn't necessarily delve into it right before you go to bed. So, but there are pictures on the backs of it as well. So I think it's 9 pages. But we, oh yeah. So we're growing habitat, and we're turning things that are barren and not much wildlife benefit out there. We're turning that into good quality habitat. Over 35,000 acres affected, by Quail Forever employees on the ground in Tennessee since April of 2013, and we couldn't have ever hoped to have that. I love my chapters. I love all that they do. I love the chapters for Quail Forever here in Tennessee, but the manpower's not there. They're volunteers. No way we could have gotten to that number in 10 years, in 15 years. So in 2.5 years, we've got a great effect on the ground. And some of the other things they're doing with the implementation side of things, they're doing some control burns or writing burn plans. At times, they're assisting on some of those control burns. They would love to do more, but it just depends on the weather. It depends on having everything in place and whether or not they're tied up for the day. But they assist the state, a lot of times the state wildlife biologists with that. Here's Brittany and Courtney out in a planting. It's got a lot of shrub cover in it. It's in West Tennessee and some natives there as well. A newly established planting, I believe, in Benton County. A lot of wildflowers, a lot of diversity. A really big, and it's hard not to do the pun, a really big buzzword lately is pollinator habitat. And it's a real thing that we are losing diversity in bee populations, as well as the monarch butterfly is very near, I would say, listing, and could be good and bad. We will have probably more regulations as a result, but we will have more funding as a result, because it just so happens that monarch butterfly habitat's awesome quail habitat, so we may get a benefit out of that. Brittany helps a lot with calibration and setup. Courtney does as well. They all do. They're familiar with these native grass drills. They do calibration and getting it set up for landowners that either rent them or borrow them from the local soil and water districts and soil conservation districts. And that's a little bit of a daunting task if you're not, especially if you're not a farmer. Even if you are a farmer, sometimes it's kind of like you're used to driving a GMC and this is a Ford. I mean, even though you know how to run a grass drill, you still got different things that you got to know how to calibrate on this. So they're there to help out with that as well. They were just here not too long ago. There's going to be a story coming out on Wildside. We're excited about that, to get them some more press, and with our partnerships with the agency. We'd really like to give thanks for a lot of things and a lot of partners. National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, it's hard not to mention them first. This is a $590,000 project, of which $25,000 came from chapters. And then we had some matching dollars through, on paper, we had matching dollars from the wildlife, from TWRA, through some positions that were already in place, I think, and through coordinating efforts and training assistance, a lot of other things. NRCS as well, they provided vehicles, office space, computers. So, but what I think the takeaway is that we used $27,000 of cash to put 3 people on the ground for 2.5 years. That's pretty amazing. And we have just renewed those 2 positions in West Tennessee have been picked up. Again, they've been renewed through partnerships with TWRA where there's actual cash dollars going in, but it's still a very efficient use of the dollars. Mark, I should have called you and asked the number. I'm putting you on the spot, but our new partnership is it a 2 or 5? So again, I apologize. This is like the great faux pas. I talked to you beforehand. I didn't even think about it, but
I just clarify that a little bit. As Andy said, When the first two Quail Forever biologists were in West Tennessee, we simply provided an in-kind match on what we were already spending
Correct.
on upland habitat and private lands projects. And now that we have and the third position came on, and we provided $25,000
Towards that.
to match with the NIFWIF grant. And so now all three positions, TWA is providing $25,000 annual for each position.
Right.
That was money that we previously had in our budget that we had been spending in some recent years on farm bill incentives, and we just thought it was a lot better. We get a lot more bang from our buck over time, and we really need those boots on the ground as biologists to walk landowners through
Right.
establishing their habitat and trying to maintain contact with them to make sure that they're managing that habitat in the future
Right.
and in an effective manner.
So that these dollars, essentially, even though they're not going to an individual landowner, they're still going on the ground. That 25,000 equates to a whole lot more acres going on the ground as a result per year. And then NRCS has picked up half of the cost of the positions. TWRA has pitched in. Chapters may have to contribute some, but Quail Forever is holding the rest of that. So it's a great partnership. I think we kind of, it was almost a test in West Tennessee to see, if it was going to work, if it was, which we were confident it would. I think now everyone is confident that it is a great success.
And we have two in West Tennessee just because of the amount of CRP land
Right.
that is over there, and they're maintaining, again, a lot of it's really educating that landowner and keeping that contact to make sure they maintain that habitat in good condition for bobwhites and other wildlife.
That's correct. That's a good point. We've had it brought up several times, even by chapters. Why are they in West Tennessee? Why are they on the Cumberland Plateau? Because there were NIFWIF grants that provided, 9/10 of the money to go toward those positions to be there. Quail habitat, it makes sense to do it in West Tennessee. It also made sense with the Shortleaf Pine Initiative, but we think it makes sense in areas like Greenville or the southern tier of counties in Middle Tennessee. Those are our next phases. We just kind of got to get all the things to align right, where we don't have to use the agencies and our own money for every all the buy-in, and we're getting there. I think we're working towards that. Those are our next goals. Is I think Greenville area roughly.
Well, ideally, we'd like to get, if we could find the funding, we'd like to get one more biologist in the Middle Tennessee, and
area.
East Tennessee, because right now we just have one TWA private lands biologist serving from 21 to 26 counties.
Right.
And it's hard for one person to cover a lot of landowners in over that many counties.
So, again, we thank all these people, the chapters that contributed there at the bottom, the Music City and the Mid-South chapter, Southern Middle Tennessee, Smoky Mountain chapter in Knoxville, and the volunteer chapter also near Knoxville. Their contributions were the total was a small amount that it added up to percentage-wise, but it was, I assure you, a big portion of their treasury coming out to support these positions, and they're wholeheartedly in support of them, and they see the good that's going on. So I thank you all for letting me speak to you today, and I appreciate the opportunity. Be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Chairman. Yes, sir. Andy, I have people, I'm from over in East Tennessee, and I have people ask me, assuming that they really put some concerted effort into habitat, how many acres does a person have to have a
Oh man,
a few coveys of birds?
And I'm going to be recorded for this, right? Well, I tell you, if you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have been pretty frustrated. And I said, well, we need to have 2,000 acres probably to make any 1,500 at the minimum. You got to get together with your landowners next door and all that. But Bill Smith, when you all were at the Greenville meeting earlier in the year, has done more to debunk that idea than anybody. If your hair's on fire like Bill Smith's and you go at it like nobody else, Bill's done it with 525 acres of available habitat there at Kiker Bottoms, surrounded by hay fields on one side and hemlock forest on the other, and he's got multiple coveys of birds. I think close to 15 coveys of birds, all wild, no introductions, no supplemental feeding, nothing like that. It's all just natural habitats. So there are other places that are doing that, places in Kentucky, that are doing it. And I would say now it's more about your intensity than it is about your size of your acreage. But I think it's still realistic that we look at that 500 acre level of cooperative management. Doesn't have to all be prime habitat, but it typically needs to be high quality nesting cover, near escape cover, near food, and within a couple 200 of these couple acre home range areas, that have all those components. You can't just have it, all big blocks spread out. It's got to be, a nice patchwork. But I think that's a realistic number with intense management.
Commissioner Cox?
Andy, I guess the money I would think invested by the agency and these people and the other NGOs is to grow quail. And I don't hear anything about how many quail how do you keep up with that? Or you study that? You got whistle counts, you got covey counts, how are you
We're establishing
judging whether
those
you're
now.
successful or not?
That's a good question, a good point. What has been done through the efforts, I think, of the private land staff and the public, both working together on these anchor WMAs, where they established 4 of those. They've established the focal area around them. Now we just at our meeting here a couple months ago, establishing how we're going to go about seeing what the real change is. So get the baseline data. Where are we at? Then the Farm Bill biologists come in, help with the work. The private lands biologist staff works. We have a baseline, then we have how we make an effect over time. Because you're right. I mean, we can say anecdotally, man, we're making a difference. We're putting habitat out there. We're getting more birds. But we need some numbers to back it up. So the focal areas are going to help with that. There are some point counts being done in West Tennessee. I am not aware of those numbers, though, what the actual results are. But that's a very good point.
Kurt?
Andy, I live in West Tennessee.
Okay.
A lot of CRP ground. It seems like these people that they sign it up and it's great for quail, but the majority of it never follows through because you go back 5 years later, they haven't bush hogged it, they haven't burned it.
That's a good point.
NRCS doesn't enforce. Seem like they have no enforcement whatsoever of their rules.
No teeth.
They're sweet gums. What
Man,
was
if
summer
we could get rid of
grasses?
sweet gum, that would be another one.
So
Yeah.
is there anything
Gum infest.
you guys can do to maybe help?
There's several,
push?
and Mark may be able to speak to this better than I am, but there are several things that we currently try to do. That on the ground, I guess, in the on the ground focus on wildlife, whereas a lot of times the DC doesn't have a wildlife background. They may have an ag background, where that person is able to go out and meet with the landowner and follow up more with those the mid contract management component is what you're talking about. We get it in for 2 or 3 years, it's great. Then it goes down, and really an old unmanaged native grass field is no better than a fescue field. It gets too thick, you lose the diversity. So yeah, that is a huge component, and it's acres that are already out there. It's not like we're having to go get new acres. They're acres that are already there. We just need to manage them right. So
Exactly.
it's a big issue, big problem. Mark, sometimes money works, and that's what they do with mid-contract management. We have funds available to intercede, to do some management, but then there are some other ways I think we can work to that. I hate to keep picking on you.
Yeah, hitting back to, again, having the people on the ground that we can have working not only with the landowners but with the personnel in the USDA offices to make sure that they fully understand the programs, and when we do catch things, non-compliance issues, that's brought attention to the district conservationist in the county, and they bring that attention to the landowner, try to, again, make them understand, remind them of what, when they sign that contract, that they needed to abide by those management specifications in their contract, and get them back on board with making sure that they stay in compliance, again, maintaining that habitat in the proper way. And again, more biologists we have that can work one-on-one with the NRCS personnel and landowners to help make sure they fully understand that. And working on outreach opportunities like the workshops that they hold, again, so that the landowner truly understands it, because they are, the knee-jerk reaction is going out and bush hogging, and sometimes they forget the way that they are actually supposed to maintain that habitat. especially with CRP contracts where you may be dealing with absentee landowners and
Yeah, that's
those sorts of things.
Sometimes it's not on purpose. Sometimes they're just not around. They don't know anybody that could go manage it for them. So that helps by having our people on the ground that know those local folks that are able to implement it. It is helpful to have that as well.
Is there a way to issue like liquidated damages on them for them not fulfilling their contract or not paying their payments if they don't keep the habitat up?
Yes, there are those sorts of things that USDA can enforce on contracts.
Does anybody out there got the nerve to enforce it?
I don't think they have the manpower. That seems to be the problem.
At home. But the majority of CRP ground at home, when it's 10 years old, if it's in a grass program, you can't even bush hog it because it's grown up so bad in trees. I mean, it just seems that we're going backwards, to me, in our area, instead of forward with. I'm serious. With as far as quail goes, we're not improving the habitat, even though that's what that's designed to do. It does for a few years, but then everything is going into trees.
Yeah, about a
Yeah.
3-year rotation. It's got to be about every 3 years, or otherwise you do start losing that.
That is an acknowledged obstacle that we deal with in these programs, not just in the programs, but people, a lot of times they're writing plans for landowners that either don't qualify to be in a program or don't want to be in a program. And on the other hand say the CRP landowner, you're kind of seeing a default in that they don't manage it enough. Getting back to some of the other private landowners, the default management is they go back to bush hogging again way too often. So we deal with that on both issues. It's trying to put together outreach materials that, maintaining that contact, because that is the hard thing about quail management. It's not just buying land and setting it aside and leaving it idle here in the southeast where everything grows so quickly. You have to have active management, and it's kind of a balancing act. So there's a lot of education that we need to reach at several levels, both with continuing to try to inform USDA personnel so that they fully understand that and can better implement the standards in their programs, and in dealing with the landowners so that they truly understand. And the Quail Forever biologists that we have are doing a great job making landowners aware of this. And we're looking to do more outreach, getting back also to the monitoring question on our 4 quail focus areas. We finished our second year of doing spring monitoring, quail counts on there, and this first year on the private lands focus areas, we also did counts, and that data we're in the process of starting how that data will be analyzed so that we can look back in several years and see where we started on our baseline data, where we're managing quail, and kind of changing quail populations that we have. But with so few relatively so few people on the ground, a lot of it's just been focused on getting the habitat on the ground. We haven't been able to get the manpower to do adequate monitoring to come back with meaningful statistics on it. In the process of trying to put together a landowners a survey that will go out to all the landowners that are in our CRP Safe Bobwhite Habitat program to at least get their feeling on how wildlife and quail have responded. Again, other management issues and those sorts of things, so we can get a better handle on trying to identify what's the most effective means, and that we need to take action to improve the management on those contract lands.
Any other questions from the commission?
So, much of the CRP land is just open field, and as you pointed out, some of the best habitats along the tree lines and the fence rows. So, is it better, or if you could encourage or convince farmers just to leave that 15, 20-yard buffer along all their fence rows and tree lines? Is that better than, open grass fields, or often is?
There's a benefit from those open fields, but yes, if those open fields are managed and established right, they would have shrubby cover going through them so that it kind of creates some diversity. But that the CP33 program, the field border program, has been huge for quail, and it does give you a great benefit for not a whole lot of loss. And I'm glad you said, 15 or 20 yards, it needs to be 60 foot is a great size. When you get down to the 30 or the 20 foot size, it becomes basically a trap. They might nest in it, but it's so close to the edge that they could be predated. When you get to that larger size, yeah, it is hugely beneficial. They are an edge species, so sure, they benefit from it. Say if you could pick out one, that's tough to say too, but if you could pick out one program, that would be a great one, to really focus efforts on. And we have, as an organization, as the Farm Bill biologists, they do a lot of work with CP33 or the Field Border Program.
Andy, you'd have to produce quail to do this, but and you may talk about this, but all we've talked about is habitat and doing good things for the birds and all that. But do they talk about hunting? I mean, I would think a landowner that bird hunts could produce birds. He's going to maintain the land fine. If he doesn't hunt, he could be promoted to lease his land to bird hunters, and if he's getting paid every year to keep his ground where he can keep getting that lease, it seems like to me he'll maintain it better. And I don't know whether that's
there's a national initiative out there called Open Fields where that very thing is being promoted. Where in states out west, we don't have much of that here, where private land is promoted as public hunting access. But you're on the track of that, and but out west they're doing this now, where it's if you want to, for a little bit more money, you can allow your land to be open for public access. It can be placed on their map system and all those sorts of things. The Open Fields Initiative is what it is, and we're in support of it. It's always difficult, I guess, and I don't want to use this as a cop-out, but in the East, it's always difficult because we say, well, are they going to love it to death? I mean, are they going to, you let one be open, or is it going to get trampled? You'd have to control access, and I don't know what the solution is there, but I like the way you're going with it, because there are times where that happens, where there are birds that are being established that people don't hunt, don't necessarily care if somebody was to hunt it. But you want, to your end is you want, if that's an option, if that's happening, you would love for somebody to know about it and be able to to get out there and to hunt it. And I agree. The Open Fields Initiative is the nearest thing that I can speak to about it. I don't know if anything's ever been discussed at the state level about that.
Well, we do in discussing, especially to the crop producers, put that forth as a benefit of having their land in the program. What we find is that most people that are really interested in this are often hunters themselves, or again, they may have friends and family that do hunt, and we encourage them that during the reestablishment, till they get their habitat up to an optimum level, to be modest on their harvest of birds. Because
we do. You're right too. We don't want to forget that's why Quail Forever is here as an organization. That's why I think wildlife conservation organization, we want people to enjoy the sport. We want the sport to remain active, to remain viable. And I think with quail, that's one thing that we've considered too, that we want to make sure that it's still a recreationally viable species in the wild. And that's always our concern. And so it's not something we take lightly. We want to make sure that people are out there, and especially kids, are getting the chance to hunt wild birds. So yeah, it's definitely worth keeping in the forefront of our minds.
Sorry. Are there any other questions from the commission or any from the audience? Mark, Director Carter, go ahead.
Just a couple of things, Commissioner. First of all, Andy's certainly no stranger to a lot of the people inside the agency. He used to work with our Wildlife Foundation before he went into work with Quail Forever. But in any case, it's been quite a partnership, and we do contribute funding both to that partnership. And I want you to also know we also contribute funding to Center for Native Grasses, which is housed at the University of Tennessee, which is working primarily with the ag community to talk about conversion into native grasses as opposed to fescue and others, and the benefits to all kinds of farming, whether it's beef, cattle, or whatever. And there's also the National Bobwhite Quail Initiative that is also housed at the University of Tennessee. We also contribute funding to that. Between both of those programs, I think they're making significant input into those programs. We also, of course, as we said, cost share with NRCS on those positions. So we have a number of partnerships, and part of what I wanted to tell you is that last year, in March of this year, at the North American Wildlife Conference, Quail Forever gave their National Partnership Award to Mark Goodland for his work in partnership through the private lands and the agency and RCS, Quail Forever, and all the others. And so Mark accepted that on behalf of all the partnerships that are going on, but for the state to be recognized, and Mark especially, I thought was pretty good. And while I'm speaking about that, I think all the commission knows, but for the benefit of everybody else, on November the 1st, Mark Goodland, who's been serving as Assistant Chief of Wildlife for a number of years, will become the Chief of Wildlife for our agency and be promoted into that position on November the 1st. And switching off just briefly for a second, less than a week ago, Frank Fiss, who's been Assistant Chief of Fisheries, has now been promoted to Chief of Fisheries. And I think you all know that Bobby Wilson, who was Chief of Fisheries, is now Assistant Director, replaced Steve Patrick. And I'm sure you need a program if I keep going here. But anyway, I want you to know about two things, primarily those partnerships that have been going on for some time, where we contribute funding for quail habitat and for quail study, and also for the changes inside the agency. So thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Director Carter. Thank you, Andy. And